Hello and welcome to Happy Times and Places, a Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, have been set the task of watching an episode, commentating along to it, and seeing if I can guess what my special guest's favourite thing about the instalment is.
Hello Toby, as requested, here are 5 things that I like about Remembrance of the Daleks from 1988.
Hello everybody, I hope the time and the place you are in are both very happy indeed, and that the next half an hour or so do nothing to alter that state for the worse. It's Remembrance of the Daleks, Episode 3. The person you heard introducing it was Charles Norton. Did not give his name. Well, he cannot remain incognito. He is a producer on the DVD and Blu-ray range, mostly the Blu-ray animation range, really. He did the Sharda and the Macroterra, and he's worked on quite a lot of them, and overseen the extras and things like that. So Power of the Daleks as well. And he's a very interesting chap who goes into the minutiae of research that I wouldn't think of doing. He's very good at, you can ring him up about what might have been in the corner of the studio, that, what shape the radiator was, or what cable was coming out of the floor or whatever, and he'll probably know, and probably know the reasons why. Doctor Who fandom is made up of all sorts of people who have their particular areas of interest and skills. And some people see things that I am blind at, as I say, sort of technical things, and which cameras are what, or how that particular piece of technology works and affects that. Whereas some people don't recognise one actor from another. Whereas that seems to be the language I speak. I can, in a crowd full of actors, I can spot one that was in something else, or I have retained some sort of information about who that guy was, and where that woman, was last seen in a theatre or whatever. So we all have, and some people, know which materials costumes were made out of, and very then have the practical application to be able to recreate that or make their own version or whatever. And it's great, isn't it? It's a fertile ground. What I love about it is that you can sort of dive in and emerge wherever you like, really, with very different experiences. And we all have little rabbit holes we disappear down, and some people just enjoy it because it's a fun program that they like watching. I think those people might be happier. Good luck to them. Unfortunately, I've not been constructed like that, so I'm about to watch an episode of Doctor Who for the 1 billionth time, and to scrutinise it and try to find meaning and remember things, and hopefully try to entertain you by saying interesting things about it. And mostly, of course, as is the raison d'etre of this particular podcast, I'm going to try to accentuate the positive, because I'm just a bit fed up of people being miserable. Not about Doctor Who. There's loads of positive Doctor Who podcasts out there that are lovely, but I've just been browsing Twitter, and it's so easy to see people, to fall into that trap of, people engaging in grievances and tit for tats and anger. And I understand it's cathartic, but it doesn't do me any good, I don't think. So I just want to hopefully put a bit of positivity out there, because I can't really do anything else. There are other people I think you're entitled to go on Twitter and get some grievances out if you've just built a shed or lagged a pipe, or invented a thing, or done a hard day's work in retail or whatever. I just talk for a living, so I may as well talk nicely, I think is the general idea. And I'm going to talk about episode 3 of Remembrance of the Daleks, and I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Now, this is one that has a bit of a personal thing going on with it, which I will reveal now. I was quite lucky when I was young, in that although my parents split up when I was 4, all my grandparents survived. Now, my dad's parents kind of dropped us like a hot brick as soon as my dad went off, but that's not what this is about. I still had both of my mum's parents, and unlike a lot of my friends at school who seem to have lost grandparents quite early, and you only have to watch sort of old films and go, I wonder how, when did he die? Oh gosh, he was 60, which was considered old or whatever. I had grandparents into their 70s, but my granddad died, I think, in the week between episode 2 and 3. So actually my video of this, because I watched this in Newbury in Berkshire where my grandparents lived, so I remember watching this at my nan's house, because my granddad was dead, with various family members around. So my friend Andy had taped this for me, and he taped it on a different machine. He hadn't taped it and then copied over, because we knew that would lose a generation. And when you were taping off air, I mean, this was priceless. And this was only the second season I could tape off air, and I'd got good tapes to do it. And but he taped it on a different machine from my machine. So this episode has always had a slightly fuzzier quality for me, and a little line down the side. I think it was a particular trademark of his recording heads or whatever. I love the Doctor's delight that the thing has worked. That is brilliant. And great, fantastic explosions in this story. It is a story of some fine explosions, and I do love Mike's machine gun. All of that stuff's done very well. So yeah, this episode comes at a was a strange one for me, because the loss of my first sort of relative and grandparent, death of. As I say, we'd had sort of, family being wrenched apart and all of that, but death had not touched us in that way. So, and it's odd now, because he was 77, which now you'd think of as being quite young, but he had one lung, he'd had polio, he'd been through the wars. I mean, literally, certainly one of them, and a very interesting, fascinating man, and but very much. Very reserved, wouldn't talk about stuff and emotions, and never talked about, of that generation that never talked about things that bothered them, and if they didn't approve of stuff, they were just sort of a bit, grumpily dismissive of it. And I suspect he was probably quite difficult in many ways, but he was a man of firm principle. And I remember my poor uncle, who's now getting close to 77 himself, and he's much younger and cooler. Being so sad, because he was about to have his first kid, and he said, he'll never live to see my child, and that child is now in her 30s. My goodness. Anyway, time. Yes, and that is all, of course, because this was nostalgic for An Unearthly Child and the start of Doctor Who, which was 25 long years ago, and of course, this, as I record this, it's 35 years ago. So my goodness me, time, you are a cruel, cruel thing. I hope there are young sort of fans who've come to the series from the new series who watch this stuff and love it, and to whom this has a sort of charming nostalgia all of itself. But to me, this is quite modern Doctor Who, and I think it does look good. I do enjoy Sylvester's costume apart from the jumper. So in shots like this, I think he looks magnificent. I love that hat. I love his scarf and the tie. The sort of splashes of colour on the cream and beige. I think this spaceship set is great. Actually, Martin Collins' design work, I think, is excellent in this story. I think when we're used to spaceships of a certain kind, this one has sort of gaps in it where they've darkened it off and sort of leaving a bit to your imagination, and they're going for a sort of light show rather than panels and control banks and all of that. And I think that's a wise move and a laudable attempt to do something very different, to give it a different sort of visual schematic, if you like. Credit to Pamela Salem and Karen Gledhill as well. I think they do a good job as these two characters. Pamela Salem, I've actually, yes, I have encountered her. She's a very nice lady. She's very polite and charming, and she's got a wonderful diction and that lovely voice, and she gets a spark in her hair there. And I was so happy when that that baseball bat was destroyed. Now, again, I don't know what my hang-up was. As I said, I didn't really like the sort of noise in the comic strip sort of spark that surrounded it. But I like that bit where he makes them shut their mouth. I think that's quite fun. And I think having a baseball bat toting young female companion is great fun. I don't know what was wrong with me. George Sewell was a mighty, mighty actor. And I think he moves up the credits for this particular episode, because I was quite surprised he was touted as a bit of a guest star, and he's actually quite low down on the credits. I'm currently watching him also in Omega, you see on the gravestone, in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is a masterclass in acting. I mean, it's gorgeous. But the plot is basically lots of people talking in a room. The plot is who's the mole, and the way that Alec Guinness's George Smiley finds out is to ask lots of people in various different rooms. Hi, Paul and John. But George Sewell, I think, is such a terrific actor, and I'm glad that he ended up doing a Doctor Who. And he I think, was it after this he ended up being the boss in the Detectives, which is Jasper Carrott and Robert Powell series. But it was in UFO, but he was one of Joan Littlewood's men. He was one of those guys in the 60s with his sort of pock-marked face and his naturalistic delivery who suddenly started appearing in quite a revolutionary way on television and changing the way that acting was done on television. And there was a naturalism to them that sort of broke the mould a little bit. People like him and Glyn Edwards and a lot of those sort of real-looking character actors. He's great, George Sewell. So I'm glad he did a Doctor Who. That's now. I was not hired. I was drafted. That's a bit of an echo of the line in MASH, isn't it? Which is the great anti-war film that has so many brilliant lines about the contradictions of morality and war, and has that great cynical sort of sardonic wit cutting through it. And I think they say of somebody, don't they? How did a man like that? How was who? Why did he join up? Or I didn't join. I was drafted. He didn't join. He was drafted. Whatever. It's better in the film. Watch the film. But anyway, I think that's an echo of that, which is also an echo of there's a similar exchange in The Ice Warriors. So it's I remember this shot in particular with him against the white sky was not great on my video version. It's nice to see it all. It's funny how a really bleached sky doesn't actually do videotape an awful lot of favours. It can suddenly make it look somehow not as good as that stuff that I think was shot on a different day, or certainly in different weather conditions in the episode before with Dursley McClendon and Michael Sheard, which looked absolutely fantastic. But that slightly bleaker, colder sky, and it suddenly has the hue of it's not great on the lines around the heads. It suddenly is where videotape, which has a sort of crispness and a clarity that can be very helpful, suddenly looks a little bit corporate video, suddenly looks a little bit, dates it slightly in a way that stuff on film doesn't so much, and stuff actually, as I say, shot on other days does not. And this is the episode, isn't it? It's here that we have the reference to Professor Bernard Quatermass. It's not happening right now, but it happens in this episode. Isn't it? I wish Bernard was here. The rocket group's got its own problems. Is it now? I wish Bernard was here. Yeah. Now I remember that didn't actually make sense to me at the time. Had I watched Quatermass in the Pit by then? Maybe I had. Maybe I hadn't. No, I don't think I had. But I just remember thinking it was a lovely, realistic line that they have a life outside of this. So it's one of those very good references. It's a lovely in-joke if you get it, but if you don't get it, you go, oh, these two know each other. They work somewhere outside of this, and they have things that could be useful to them that we might not see, which just kind of makes it realistic. Not everything's relevant to the plot, but it sort of helps to complete the bigger picture. I'm trying to resist using the word verisimilitude because I get into trouble. But with Stephen Shapansky of Radio Free Skaro, and I'm sure some other friends of mine, when I use the word verisimilitude, which I've now used twice. I like the fact that Ratcliffe is still referring to him as my man, even though we know he's the traitor. It's like, yeah, I'm still going to refer to him obliquely just to keep it a bit of a surprise. But that is a very nice. It's creepy because when they come out and you get a little bit of the rattle, there's a little bit of a rattle of the music, and I don't know. It makes you sort of go, oh, Mike. And I love all this action stuff of the setting up the sandbags and the. Oh, there's a Unishol. There's a soldier there sweeping up. You're on broom duty, son. But all this busyness is very nice, and Doctor Who with the military is, it's a thing that works. What is it? First saw it in the War Machines, and then of course it becomes, part of the show in the 70s. And I think it's because the Doctor is so non-militaristic. And as a writer, it means you can have your cake and eat it. You can get somebody doing all the blowing stuff up, and then do your liberal peace sticky stuff of going, I don't approve of this blowing up, but when it's useful for the plot, it's very, very helpful. Which means that, of course, people can interpret the show in different ways. And as I've said before on these, I have friends who are right of centre, which I am not, who sort of go, well, the Doctor is, very much somebody who, sees something he doesn't like and has it wiped out, but, doesn't get his hands dirty and gets other people to do it. This now that he's so good. He's so good at that when he does the we and the they, and that sort of little enigmatic ghost flits across his face. He's so good at that stuff, Sylvester McCoy. And I quite like it when there's a sort of I think it was an interesting thing to sort of play with. I prefer my Doctor to just be a person without any particular great skills, who has not had any power, who is just somebody that through wit and invention and a decent moral compass is doing their best and does their best sometimes in very trying circumstances, and through a bit of potluck and no shortage of wit manages to save the day. Because I can't identify with somebody who's all powerful. I can identify with somebody that's muddling along and doing their best and trying to do the right thing and not always getting it right. But I remember that shot, and that I love this Dalek livery here. The glossy black Dalek is an absolutely fantastic move, and again an attempt like this attempt to make the Doctor perhaps some sort of key Time Lord figure, which is an attempt to reinvigorate the mythology. I think the timing of this is absolutely fine, even though my taste is more towards he's a bit of a bumbler. This Black Dalek and there's been factions of Daleks before, but again this attempt to really reinvigorate it and to use that to its advantage. Go, well, we have these two different factions because they're because they're into racial purity, they don't like each other. That's a very clever evolution of that Dalek mythology. And to throw that into the mix, these different liveries that they have. As I say, I'm not wild about the cream and gold, but I wasn't at the time. I'm actually quite liking it in this, watching it now. But I love that black one. I think that black one just looks incredible. It makes you go, why haven't they painted them all gloss all of the time? I remember this being a real shock because you were thinking that this was Davros. And there was a rumour that Davros was appearing. Now, we already knew that it wasn't going to be Davros because Roy Tremelli was credited as the Emperor Dalek, who's the Emperor Dalek with the TV Dalek sort of big dome kind of thing, TV comic Dalek big dome thing going on. I mean, so many things sprinkled in here. That Emperor Dalek that I was talking through before with the dome, like in the comic strips, absolutely gorgeous. Was credited in the Radio Times as Roy Tremelli, and one was on the lookout for anagrams, and so I'd love to say I worked it out. In fact, a friend of mine did and said, "Have you noticed, of course, Roy Tremelli, it's Terry Malloy?" And I went, "Yeah." I hadn't. I had to get it pointed out. Now, these things, I love this thing. I had one of these once. My mum gave it to me for Christmas one year, not knowing that it had been in Doctor Who, actually. And it was a really fun thing, but this was slightly scuppered because it was already on a Noel Edmonds quiz show thing. So it was a kind of existing prop. Now, Doctor Who in those days, it had to get stuff that was available a lot of the time, and it's a funky looking thing. Unfortunately, it has an association with something else. They wobble about a bit, don't they, these Daleks? But it's great seeing them on an earthly street. You can see that one in the reflection of the window moving really slowly. I love seeing these two scampering about the Doctor and Ace, because they've got such a great rapport that they even have it when they're not saying anything. But yes, the time controller was in a Noel Edmonds thing, so it was already a known quantity. So unfortunately, that destroys it a little bit. Interestingly, it doesn't really now. I mean, we know of those things, but we know of lava lamps, and I think you're going to have a kind of cognitive dissonance when you're watching The Prisoner and go, "Well, that's a lava lamp." You go, "Yeah, but it's also a funky 60s blobby thing." So maybe time has been a bit kinder to the time controller. Mine got broken when I moved to London and was unpacking. Anyway, you don't need to go into the history of my broken ornaments. But yeah, I did have one, but it didn't survive the test of time. I always thought it was because Tipping Soldier, when he'd been exterminated, had been flown backwards. I always thought it was slightly wrong that these builders of Ratcliffe's had died on the spot, and that they should sort of all be mangled up against the wall. Which would have probably been pretty horrible. But yes, the Daleks never. There's never been time to do that effect of the soldier in episode 1. Which is fine, because you do a kind of it's like many things with television at the time they might show you something once, and then you have to kind of assume that happens every time something happens, even though it happens the rest of the time out of shot. But of course, I mean, the continuity of this is slightly it's the real difficulty, isn't it, of going, well, we'll tie this up with the past to reward long-term fans, but of course, when the Doctor meets the Daleks in the second story, it's the first time it's happened, and he doesn't know anything about them. And now we're supposed to believe that 4 weeks earlier, he was laying a trap for the creatures he'd never met before, which is, it means that continuity can be a poison chalice, because you're going, "Oh yeah, fans, we're going to talk about the old days," but then if you don't get it absolutely right, like spelling Foreman right, or doing the correct French Revolution book, or actually acknowledging the correct timeline of the series, fans can get furious. I mean, watched in isolation now, I mean, I think at the end of the day, you just allow it to happen, or you don't really. I don't get much pleasure having to sort of. I can find reasons. I'm sure I could find reasons if I wanted to, but I have to say I much prefer just taking a story on its own merits, really. Of course, unless it's a story I don't like, and then I get furious with it. But I could take the Deadly Assassin mucking about with what the Time Lords had been like, because the Deadly Assassin is brilliant. I wanted to be cross with modern Doctor Who, so the continuity mistake was a stick I wanted to beat it with. I have to say, slightly different to Deadly Assassin, which was deliberately trying to ruffle some feathers, because he's funny, as old Robert Holmes, and he's a he likes messing with things. I love the way these two run. I don't know, it's brilliant. McCoy is a very good runner. That said, I find the umbrella stuff a bit irritating. But he's very good at holding onto his hat and scarpering. He's a scarperer, and I like scarpering. It reminds me, scarpering is something people don't really do anymore. It's like having a catapult at school. But I mean, you would think was deadly dangerous now and a very serious offence. In the 70s, it had a certain sort of rapscallion's charm about it. Yes, yesterday's peskiness is today's feral youth. Maybe that's just me as I get older. I find bad behaviour absolutely the heralding of the end of civilization rather than schoolyard pranks. Maybe that's just a natural process that one goes through. But I love all of this. The Doctor with the military, the Doctor in the 60s. I know Charles talked so eloquently about why the 60s was such a good setting in episode 1, and I talked less eloquently about it in episode 2. And doesn't he does a real moment in a minute, doesn't he? It's a bit like the bit in Keys of Marinus where the guy goes, I'm going to say something really obvious that makes it clear that I'm in league with the murderer. And he does that kind of now. But which I mean, actually, it's not as bad as some examples of that kind that you have in dramas. And actually, it's important that it happens at this moment, because it's not just he's revealed that he's a bad guy. It's that it's the betrayal of Ace, and he just invited her out to the pictures. Is that a Bren gun? Remember, my Action Man had one of those. They're pretty cool. And I think somebody's about to be shot and do a bit of a somersault. Yeah, look at that. Love all of that. Tipping is the stunt man. That's not one of the most successful effects of the episode. The sort of slightly two-dimensional craft there, but I think visually this is so ambitious, and I think the schoolgirl with the motorcycle helmet and the Dalek ion is such a great sort of Doctor Who image, and I think she does it well as well. I like the way she does the eye. She's brilliant. Jasmine Brakes as a schoolgirl. She is the daughter of an actor called Sebastian Brakes, who is in an Out of the Unknown episode, which I hadn't known at the time. I didn't know his work really until I started doing Out of the Unknown for the DVD of that. And I was like, Sebastian Brakes, blah, blah, blah. And then Andrew Morgan mentioned that Jasmine Brakes, Sebastian Brakes. I went, oh, great, of course, it all links together. Gosh, it's near, yes, it's near the end of the episode, because Rachel walks in at the beginning of the episode. So this is brilliant. This is an absolutely fantastic effect. The fact that it's a practical spaceship, the fact that it's a load of skips stuck together, I don't care. The fact that it breaks the window, it's that sort of attention to detail that I don't think you always get with Doctor Who, and you can't always afford with Doctor Who. I think having the smoke coming out of the bottom, I think having it smash the windows. I'm sure I had relatives. In fact, I did have relatives watching that. It's a bold move, actually, to end on a joke as well. It is a bold thing. See, Ratcliffe's up the credits. It is a big... I hate the way I said that. I said that like an absolute effing geek. No, and Ratcliffe's up the credits. Oh, God. This is why I don't listen back to anything I ever do. I sympathise with you. I mean, I'm doing this. I obviously assume people want to listen to this, and yet I hate everything I say and how I say it. Shirley Coward, the Vision Mixer. She was the Vision Mixer on the 10th planet, on the first regeneration, and she died last year. Shirley Coward, she was a name that I saw on lots. She was a Vision Mixer on Blue Peter quite a lot, I think. I quite liked seeing her name on Doctor Who and going, I've seen her name on other stuff. But I mean, I have to say, I love the heftiness of these credits, the fact that you get a chance to read them all. Oh, it's delicious. Now, listen. What was I saying? I was talking about, yes, I was watching this at home, not at home, at my nan's house with family, because I remember let's call her my aunt. She wasn't married to my uncle at the time, but you're not researching my family tree. And they're the London people. My Uncle John, who's, I say none of my family were in show business. My uncle was a film editor. But but he never introduced me to anybody. I remember he was once in a lift with Tom Baker, which I was very impressed by. But he edited pop videos and things like that, and he was an assistant editor on a couple of the Monty Python films. But he'd sort of gone away to London. And he was the closest we had to anything sort of spectacular, and I think he once said he knew somebody called Sally who was in Blake 7, and I remember being very impressed with that. Which turns out Sally Nivette, and I've since, I think, now have a connection to every single one of the regular cast of Blake 7 through people I know or friends of friends. It's really weird how that's happened, but let's not get into that. Because we can go down too many different paths. Some people like that, I'm sure, and those that don't have probably stopped listening by now because there've been many episodes. Anyway, stick to the point, which is, what was I to write? So we were watching. I remember watching at my nan's house, and it was one of those occasions where, of course, we had to watch with people around, and it wasn't actually a very big living room. And I remember my uncle's partner, Gabby, who. Not in the business, but graphic design, but a sort of London they're London people, and with that has and London will always seemed a bit sort of cool and a bit metropolitan. I remember when we went to see Uncle John, we went to the cinema. We never went to the cinema, it was a different life, but they could also be quite sneery about stuff. And obviously, as I've got older, I see that in a lot of people, a lot of metropolitan intellectuals, he said, suddenly sounding like the Daily Mail, which I don't mean to at all. I love metropolitan intellectuals, but I do sometimes wish they liked stuff a bit more. And I count friends of mine amongst this who has sort of always assume that something an actor's done has been a mistake rather than a choice, who always assume that when a writer's put something that's not necessarily logical, it's a mistake rather than a touch of reality, or that the writer doesn't necessarily think what the person that there's all of I always sort of go in. I always assume the best of the people whose work I've chosen to give my time to watching, but I soon, as I've got older, I've realised, oh gosh, my there are sort of metropolitan intellectual friends of mine who actually sort of think most things are a bit crap, and I don't want to be that. And I love my uncle and that side of the family, and they're really interesting, very funny people, but. But John likes, he likes foreign films. He's quite arty. He likes the sort of, and he knows his film because he's a film editor. So he's watched all the Truffaut and all of that sort of thing, and has that's the language he speaks, is sort of quite sort of intellectual, thoughtful. Because I'm much more sort of populist, maybe. But it doesn't. But I think artistic stuff is great, and I sometimes wish I spoke the language of that stuff a little bit better. But I also think populist is really hard to, or popular is really hard to do, especially clever popular. Now, populist, I think, can be quite easy, and you can get away with doing some stuff that's actually not very high quality and that's actually a bit sort of thoughtless and not very good, and get lots of people watching it. But to get people watching something that's a bit different and a bit crazy and has like robotic motorcycle helmet wearing half Dalek schoolgirls, and a treatise about racism and alien creatures that are metaphors for fascism, but that also then reflect back on the problems within our own society and how we're perhaps not as far away from those things as we might think ourselves to be, and have it all in an adventure with soldiers and explosions and a character who's very serious and brooding but also really, really funny and can scamper around London holding his hat and making sure it doesn't blow off in the wind, and with his sort of delinquent companion who's got her own troubled backstory but is plucky and exciting and fun. I don't think that's easy. And I remember Gabby saying, when it was the scene when Ratcliffe was in in the graveyard, instead of going, oh, it's that fine actor George Sewell, I think he had a line where he said something like, come on lads, put your backs into it, which is a sort of nothingy line that sort of gets us from A to B, and it stops it being a quiet scene, and it just, it emphasizes who's in charge and blah blah blah. It's not much of a line, but it's not. And just going, oh God, who writes this terrible dialogue? And I'm going, that's the bit you notice. That's the bit. I mean, it's not even worth commenting on. It's not every line is a gem, and not every line has to be a gem. Sometimes stuff just has to be texture or something for the ears, something to move you along, something to bolster it up, or stop there being a lull, or just to fill the scene a little bit. And I just remember thinking, why would it even occur to you for that to be a bit to talk about when there's so much else going on? And I'm pretty sure they were also pretty dismissive of the spaceship because it looks like a few skips stuck together. But me, who's used to spaceships in Doctor Who, was going, it's solid. It's three-dimensional. It's clearly being sort of lowered down on a crane. This is Doctor Who being extraordinarily ambitious. And I think when the glass went in, they went, well, that would have cut everybody to pieces. And I'm going, but they've gone to the trouble of breaking the glass, because I think in those days still, and you don't do it now because everything has to be so realistic. I think in those days, one still admired when they made a scene more realistic than sometimes scenes like that were, because they'd done a bit of attention to detail, and they'd gone, actually, we're going to try not to make the audience break the audience out of their spell, or we're going to try and impress them with a little bit of a flourish, because that will perk them up, that will make them interesting, because the audience in those days we still sometimes had to join the dots, if you like, because it was three-wall sets, multi-camera, all of that sort of thing, and even things like Juliet Bravo or whatever, when people went outside, you'd see a sort of piece of shrubbery and a white studio sky, and you'd sort of have to go, I'm accepting that they're walking out, and then of course it would cut to outside and it would be on film and look completely different. That was that was a pact that they made with us, but very occasionally they'd go, but yeah, thanks for doing that, but we're not going to rely on that. Where we can make the effort to sort of impress you and to go a little bit further, we will do that. And of course, it's a thankless task if your audience is of a certain mindset, because you do that thing with the glass, and then somebody will go, well, that would have cut them to pieces, and you go, well, why did I bother? Do you know what I mean? I sometimes find that when you write things, or you put you go, well, do you know what? If you're in a mindset to go, it's like, and it sometimes happens with stand-up where you get an audience that's a bit of a grind, so you go, all right, I'm going to stick in a gag here because this needs a bit of livening up. You do a gag, and they go, oh yeah, right, and you go, right. So you weren't going for the slightly whimsical, hopefully the slightly sort of charming storytelling that I'm just trying to get you on board with. You want something a bit peppier, so all right, I'll do you a joke, and then you get the, oh, is that just a bit of wordplay? As if that's a very London metropolitan thing as well. I remember when I started gigging in London, having cut my teeth here in Manchester, thinking, well, yeah, but when I get to London, because of how I say and because of how I speak and because of I do clever jokes, they'll love me in London. And then you I remember going to London and going, doing a joke. I remember this comedy club that is a very good one, but I remember doing off the top of my head, just doing a sort of a bit of a pun, just to again get me from A to B, and getting a kind of oh, you did some wordplay, and it's like, yeah, you're at a comedy club. This is such a thing is not beneath you. So you either come with me or you don't. But don't judge me as a stand-up comedian for bunging in a gag, because otherwise we're not going to get on. I think I don't like being patronised, and I don't like it when I'm with an audience and they patronise. They kind of assume it's the equivalent of folding your arms and sitting back in your chair and going, go on then, impress me. Screw you. No, come with me on a journey and I'll take you on a journey. But Doctor Who, they're doing its very best to overcome its budgetary shortcomings, and in key areas going, we're really pushing the boat out with this. So come on, you've got to go and meet it halfway. Now, I mean, I don't think you could do that with television at all now, because we're so much further away from the theatrical tradition that that television still had, had its roots in then. Now, everything has to be realistic. Certainly on a sort of technical level, we don't accept stuff that isn't technically realistic, really. I'm not sure what we've won there, really. I know it's not real. We knew that wasn't real, but you either take it on trust or you don't. And I think the makers of Remembrance of the Daleks deserved our trust, because in key areas they're really pushing the boat out. They've cast it well, they've shot it well. The money seems to be far more on screen than it was just a year ago. And it's nice that I can see it without it was a sort of flat green line down the side from whatever it was with my friend's video, which just meant it was a slightly not as good a picture on episode 3. So I'm glad they're all uniform now, although that image will still always be in the back of my head when I watch that episode. It's funny, isn't it? The little there's various episodes that I watched when they were pirated where bits would do that. And I now can't watch those episodes. I think there's a bit in the Space Pirates where Donald G had a thing about I can't remember what the line was now. I'd know it if I was watching it. And he says, what was it about Clancy's ship or something like that? And in my copy it would go, what would you do to Clancy's ship? And now I can't when I watch that scene, I still can't quite hear it without in the back of my head the wobbly bit that goes all over the place where the picture judders and the sound goes all there are certain episodes that I watched that had tape faults or breaks in quality or whatever, that because I watched them so many times back in the day, and these ones, because as I say, this was the second series that I was videotaping live from home, and my season 24 I'd got cheap tapes, and they that was, I remember regretting that, but I'd actually got decent, I think, BASF tapes, which had a silver box, and I did Letraset for the lettering on the side. So I'd have my own. The plan was to have my own. A library in order with uniform spines. But of course, I think my plan was eventually to get stickers. Because, of course, I had loads of different makes of videotape, was eventually I think I wanted to get stickers that were all the same, and I've just spent hours, uniforming my own collection, but life got in the way, video became obsolete, and now, the whole season will fit into a tiny little box, which wouldn't need individual spines. But I do miss those days of having my own spines that I put Letrasets on, and then I bulk bought some boxes and did my own covers and had my own color scheme on the spines and for each Doctor, and they all matched. I think I'll do a podcast about that. That's not for now. Anyway, I don't know. Sorry, it's a nostalgic trip for me, this one. God bless you, Grandad. He was a printer. He was one of, I think, 13 or 11 children, and they said he'd been to a special school. He hadn't. He was in a kids' home, and he'd been in the army. He was a teetotaler. He'd stopped drinking because my grandmother was a Methodist and said, I'll only marry if you don't drink. And people did that. So he just went, all right, and never drank again. And she would occasionally have a glass of red wine or Stone's Green Ginger at Christmas, but he'd made a promise and he kept it. He also had a Weetabix for breakfast every morning, except for Sundays when he had, 2 Weetabix for breakfast every morning, except on Sundays when he had boiled eggs and soldiers. And that was his habit, except for when he was about 75. He looked at his 2 Weetabix and said, I'm bored of those. And then had shreddies and had them every day of the week, except for Sundays. And his final act, I'm not padding here, I'm just looking for Charles's contribution, because Charles is going to tell me what his favourite thing was. Oh, I've got to choose my favourite thing. But I'll finish this about Grandpop, because why not? He was a a union man. He was a printer, died in the Wool Socialist, who his final act was Margaret Thatcher was on Newsnight, and he said, I've had about enough of that woman for one lifetime. I'm going to bed. And he went upstairs and he died. And I just think there's something whether you're a Thatcherite or not, he definitely was not. And I think there's something rather beautiful in that firm principle of his, because he was a printing man as well. I remember that Thatcher destroyed the print unions to ingratiate herself and give great power to Rupert Murdoch, who has changed the tenor of our national conversation irreparably, and I feel very, very badly. But he was a great mouthpiece for her. So she, but we also have to be honest about the history, and that the unions did take the piss quite a lot. But nonetheless, I love the fact that my granddad was true to himself right to the end. Ha ha ha! Bless him. But yes, and the last time I saw him, I was on my way to a Doctor Who convention, and I'd forgotten my tickets. That's right, and I had to go back and get them. And he was sort of mock grumpy about it, and I felt this great affection for him. He was quite a scary man, and I sort of rubbed him on the shoulder and said, "See ya," and I never did. Anyway, and he was scary, and he was quite scary. He wheezed because he only had one lung, but he was a great principled man. Anyway, Anyway, we will not see his like again. Very undemonstrative. Just got on with it. Who knows what was going on inside that head of his? Terrible now I think about it. I asked him if he killed anyone because he fought in the war. Once, and he just got his head down because he wasn't going there. And I remember once, I think I'd had a bit of a tantrum about something. I think Mum had been out of order, but she made me go and apologise to him. And I sort of went and apologised to him, which was quite hard to do because I was a kid. And he sort of went, well, just didn't rub it in, didn't have a go. And I sort of tacitly took from that, I know where you're coming from, lad. They pushed you into that tantrum. Or I don't know, I felt he'd given me a little bit of solidarity, but he would never said anything like that. But he was a very interesting man and would not talk down to you. I'm sure I used to ask him really boring things at night, and he knew about all sorts of different things because he was from that generation. He'd left school. He didn't go to school, I don't think he was. I think he'd left school at 11 or whatever there, but he did the crossword, and he was, and I think because he'd been denied an education, he was extremely well read, and I think back to those generations of people who didn't have the things that we had, so therefore valued things like education and books and other people's opinions and and rigor and different experiences. He was he had such a wide knowledge. So I'd ask him about actors, and he'd know about them, even though he wasn't a theatre person. He wasn't somebody who cared about that sort of thing. But if I'd go, Doctor, have you heard of an actor called Victor Madden? He'd go, oh yeah, he's got a chin and he'd tell you. Stratford John, he'd know because he just knew stuff. Because he read the paper. He read the paper from front to back. Of course he did. He was a printer. He was probably looking for mistakes. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, sorry. That was my granddad. Edward George Mister. Weird though. Had to call him Joe. Didn't like the name Edward. There was something there. Had a very difficult childhood. But, you didn't talk about stuff in those days. Now, was that healthy or not? I don't know. Different. It's just different. Anyway, what's my favourite thing about the first episode of Doctor Who that was broadcast without my granddad in this world? Sorry about that. I hope that wasn't boring. I'm not cutting it out though. It's my podcast. It is what it is. It's funny how personal this show is, isn't it? It's a personal journey through life. And every episode means, to somebody somewhere, Time Flight 3 is of great importance because it was the first time they lost somebody, or the first time they fell in love, or the first time they made a realisation about life, or just the first time they realised they fancied men in uniform. Whatever. Doctor Who. So, look, what's my favourite thing about episode 3. Now, could it be the reference to Professor Bernard Quatermass? Just because that is a very personal thing, and because I love Quatermass, and because, as I say, I kind of liked the line without really registering what it was referring to at the time. Is it the sleight of hand or sleight of helmet? Where the thing that you think is Davros, because I love the John Leeson voice as well. I love the bit in episode 1 where it goes, "We must be informed of its movements," and it does that slight. Yeah, I like that. I like that noise. But it's a great voice that Leeson does that makes you think it's a sort of Davros-y thing, but it's not. It's the husky-faced, squinty-eyed, waspish schoolgirl of death, and I love that's a great surprise moment, unless you've had the surprise ruined for you because you know that it's Davros inside the TV comic-y type domed Emperor Dalek, which is a great thing. It's a new thing. That spaceship design is terrific. That spaceship landing is terrific. The shattering of the glass is terrific. Oh, well, do I say... Maybe I have to... Do I say that? Maybe I have to say it's that heft in the production. It's partially because a lot of it's on location. But the design is excellent. Martin Collins' design is excellent. They've tried to do different things. They've tried to do a different kind of vibe for the Dalek spaceship interior. It doesn't look like any other spaceship in the series, really. And then that juxtaposed with the nice recreation of the 60s, which is quite subtly done in places. And obviously, I suppose one would say easier, but nothing's easier on television. But it's nice. It's nicely evocative, whilst also being, of a recent past, while also being recognisable. But I just think if you compare it to everything the season before, this story, production-wise, looks $1 million comparatively. It's a show that's confident. It's a show that's having a go at being better, at being a more solid production, at expecting less. The comic strippy stuff of season 24 is quite fun in retrospect. It was embarrassing at the time, or it was for me at that age. As I say, I know for a lot of people for whom it was a lovely, joyous breath of fresh air after an unnecessarily violent period, particularly season 22. So I understand that as well. But talking purely personally, season 24 is about as low as it got for me, and this just seemed so much more confident and something that I could show my friends, and something that I thought if the general public, whoever they were watching, would actually look pretty good. Except, of course, we know that the general public say things like, "Oh, but that glass would cut their faces," and all the things that Gabby said. But I just think it's a confident, well-mounted production. So that the production values, the design, the solidity of the whole thing, the attention to detail, that attempt to make the Dalek spaceship being solid, the glass blowing in, the sets all being robust, the location really helping with all of that as well. So I just think, can I say that just the sort of production and the sort of upward swing in quality from only a year before, where it's a very different beast, where it's closer to sort of CBBS in CBBC. There wasn't such a thing, but it's closer to Galloping Galaxies than it was to Star Trek. Whereas, although Star Trek wasn't set in the 60s, it seemed to me that Remembrance of the Daleks looked like it was closer to grown up, proper telly, rather than I was having to make concessions because it was Doctor Who. Charles won't have chosen that. I wonder what Charles will have chosen. Let's find out. Oh, it's a shame because we actually agreed on the last one. But I'll see, because he might say something that touches upon this, and I might be generous to myself. What does Charles Norton like about episode 3?
So, moving on to episode 3. And it's the spaceship landing in the playground outside the school at the end of the episode. And reasons for liking it? Well, obviously it's a wonderful, big, dramatic moment in which a spaceship lands in the middle of a East London school. But really, again, I think it's actually the way in which the moment is staged and the decisions the production team took, the frankly bonkers decision the production team took to actually shoot it essentially for real. If you were looking at that moment in the script, even now, I think if you're looking at that moment in the script now, your first thought would be that this is something we need to fake, either digitally or with miniatures. Obviously, we are not going to build a full-size spaceship and have it fly above a school and land in a school playground. That would be lunacy. And that's exactly what they do. They actually build a full-size spaceship and lower it into the school playground on a crane. And it works really, really well. It feels visceral and real in a way that nothing else could. Nothing else could at the time, and frankly, probably nothing else could now. It really sells the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger feels so much more real and tangible and dangerous because of the way in which they chose to stage that moment. And it's something you get quite a lot of in this story. I mean, there's famously a moment in I think it's in episode 4 where they let off some pyrotechnic charges, I think at the gates of the scrapyard, and rather than use the minimum amount of explosive necessary to create a visual effect, they basically just built a massive bomb and let it off with such force that it vaporized the gate and ended up with the police being called. But it's it says a lot about their approach to this story, and it does feel, how can I put this? It makes the story feel a lot more relatable, a lot more grounded than a lot of 80s Doctor Who stories would. In fact, a lot of television science fiction would have done at the time. The decision to go that nuts and bolts, that basic and brutish with it, really does help a lot.
Well, I'm having that. I think that we touched upon enough of the same things. What do you mean you don't agree? It's not up to you. I mean, if you're keeping score, I don't want to get all Alec Guinness on you, but please go outside and do something else. Never listen to this podcast again. I think I'm allowed that point, aren't I? If you disagree, tough. How dare my granddad's just died? How dare you? No, I think there was enough there, and it keeps it exciting for the last episode, doesn't it? I think damn it, yes, I'm going to claim this one because I think we were pretty much enunciating the same things, even though I fixed on a more general aspect and he fixed on a particular one. But then I distilled it down to various things, including that Dalek spaceship, whereas he fixated on the spaceship and then opened it out as it being an example of the things I was talking about. So I'm taking that point. I remember also, because I'm sure Mary Morris's Panna from Kinder's obituary was in The Guardian that week. I remember reading it at my nan's house, and I wonder if she died on the same day as my granddad. I think I'd got the impression at the time that she had. I remember, you get the little crumbs of comfort where you can. Well, at least he died on the same day as somebody that was in Doctor Who. And it was always funny because I'd always, whenever I got hold of a newspaper, because we only got the local paper at home, the Shropshire Star, So when there was a copy of The Guardian, I would leaf through, and you'd quite often happen across an obituary for an actor that had been in Doctor Who, and maybe that instilled something in me to make sure I would have a bash at doing those one day. So look, I think it's 2-1 to me, Charles Norton, as we go into episode 4. That all went a bit round the houses, didn't I? Oh, I would also like to say, last episode I mentioned that I thought Ace's dialogue sometimes gave the impression it was written by men who'd never touched a bra. And I didn't mean by that men who'd never touched a bra because they don't particularly want to. There was no inference of that at all. It's more men who've never touched a bra who'd very much like to touch a bra, but because they don't understand how women work or speak, have not had the opportunity. That was what I was implying. So anyway, let's leave that there. And I'm going to go to bed, I think. Am I? I don't know. You don't need to know what I get up to after the music has played. But I am going to end this one that has been all around the houses and quite a long way down memory lane. I hope that's been okay for you. Yeah, well, when I first watched this, it was a sad time in a sad place, but just goes to show how things can change if you, with the passage of time and a little bit of experience and a little bit of perspective. All right, cheerio. Well, thank you very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock. My special guest this time around is Charles Norton, who's far too sensible to be on any forms of social media, which is why he's got the time to find out which cables were used on which episodes of Doctor Who. I'm grateful to him, and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Stephen Moffat, Ruben Herfindahl, Lee Jin Henderson, Rhys Williams, Jelly Tussle, Peter the Speaker, James Parsons, Tim Smith, Ronin, DC. Don't know your full or real names, guys, but you can address that in the patron messages if you want to fill me in. If not, you will remain under those monikers. Still very grateful to you, even though I don't know what you're actually called. Philip Stubley, Robert Jewell, not that one, Mark Findlay Smith, Damien Timmer, Ian Moore, Leanne Potts, Nick Salmond, Erica Lear, Sheila Moore, Jason Taken, Christopher Newman, and Pete Lambert. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Having your name mentioned on the credits is one of the perks that you get if you go to www. Yeah, I don't think those 3 W's are necessary anymore. Have you ever been to the internet? Patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get all sorts of treats, including, yes, having your name read on the credits, but also getting bonus releases, advanced releases, exclusive releases, and all sorts of other things. Well, not that many other things. I mean, there's no physical contact or back rubs or sweets or anything like that. There's badges if you go up the tiers, because £3 a month is the lowest tier. You get all the words for that. You get all the I was going to say creativity, but that's stretching it a bit. But all of the podcasts and everything, all of the content. That's a horrible phrase. I've written some content today. Are you a robot? But you get all of that at the lowest tier. There's nothing denied to anybody. But you get your name read out on the credits more often the higher up the tiers you go. You get badges. There are other things that actually nobody's bothered claiming because either they're not that good or that's not really what it's about. It's about people who produce stuff giving you the option to support it financially if you want to. Can totally understand if you don't want to, because stuff's free these days and that's part of the deal. I'm glad that you're just listening to it, whatever you're doing. But also because the cost of living has skyrocketed. I saw some peanuts in the shop the other day that I remember getting in lockdown for £2. I think they're on a little bit of a little bit of a discount there, but they were £2, and I saw them today, and they were £3.15, which they were nowhere near when they were not, even on full price in lockdown. No, I know that peanuts, I mean, they're a good source of energy. I think there used to be a thing when we were a kid, if you set fire to a peanut, was that a thing? Let's not get into peanuts right now. Don't start using peanuts as fuel. Way too expensive. They've skyrocketed. Anyway, my point is, I know everybody's a bit skint. If this gives you some sort of form of entertainment or even diversion, then I'm extremely flattered that you've chosen to spend your hour walking the dog, cleaning the kitchen, torturing your prisoner with me in your ears. But the Patreon thing is there if you're so inclined or capable. It may be that you don't want to sign up to a monthly thing and have that sort of commitment, but do occasionally you want to throw a few pennies into my hat, in which case you can go to kofi.com/Toby Haydock. And believe me, this is as embarrassing for me to do as it is probably cringeworthy for you to hear, but it's the reality of these things. And doing it at the end here and doing the Patreon thing means your podcast, because a lot of you could have stopped listening by now. And if you have, I can say anything you like about you green-faced goon, because you're not listening. All the people listening here have no trace of green on their faces and are not remotely goon-like. There's not a scintilla of Seacom in you. Oh no, they were good goons though. I meant bad goons. Let's not get into what sort of goons I meant, and I'm not going to say all goons are the same. So listen. Right. This is the problem. What was I saying? What this post-credits, soliciting, if it's what it is, isn't it? Soliciting. Although I suppose I've given you your pleasure, now I'm just so it's a bad way. Normally, I think if you solicit, you take the money first. This is why. Let's not get that metaphor any further. What I'm saying is, doing this now, I think it is faintly embarrassing, but it does mean that I don't have to interrupt the podcast or even begin the podcast with adverts, which I know occur in a lot of other podcasts, and I have kept these advert-free, just because I prefer it that way on a purely just in the dissemination of content and how I like it to be. I'd like to say it's a point of principle, but it's probably just more that I used to watch the BBC more, and I didn't like having to edit adverts out of ITV programmes. So I'd love to say it was some great moral stance against capitalism, but it's not. It's just I prefer listening to podcasts without adverts, so I'm going to do one without adverts too. But of course, yes, that great moral stance then goes, but please can you give me some money? So it's all a compromise, isn't it? Anyway, that was a very long way of going. There are ways of contributing financially to this podcast if you want to, but of course I have to couch it in a very apologetic middle class way of going, but I'm just not terribly important. I don't really like doing it, but I don't dislike doing it enough to not do it. So there, I've done it, but I've done it in a really tortuous and roundabout way. Anyway, shall we leave? Yeah, I think you get the message. That was longer than a blooming podcast. Okay, let's keep this bit brief. I'm on Twitter at Toby Haydock. So are these podcasts at Haydock Podcasts. And come to my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which is in Manchester every Tuesday at 8 p.m. And that has its own Twitter feed at Excess Malarkey. Now, you see, this is where I should have done all the stuff about my we used to call him Grandpop, not Grandad, because we had. I think my dad's parents were Gran and Grandad, but as I say, they kind of dropped us. They were slightly more well-to-do than my mum's side of the family, so of course they had standards, which meant that the grandchildren essentially got disowned when their son buggered off. But my gran, he was Grandpop. Nan and Grandpop. Nan and Grandpop. You don't get Grandpops anymore, do you? You get Nans you hear more of. There weren't many Nans. Most people had grannies and granddads. Oh, was he? He was. I think Dad's dad might have been Grandpa. It's quite a. Yeah. There's quite a. There are lots of pulls in different directions with my my parents, different sides of the families. No sort of schisms in that way, because we're not really like that. But apart from the major one of when my parents split up. Anyway, let's not get into that. The point is, he was called Grandpop. Yeah, Grandpop. And he looked not unlike Sergeant Arnold from The Web of Fear. I think there was a certain men who'd been in the army who looked a certain way, who had that sort of their hair sort of combed in a certain way, and he had one of those sort of square combs that sort of put that you used to have those at school as well. And I think some kind of whether it was product or whether it was just an accumulation of flatness, I don't know, but it was combed in a certain way, and he had the moustache. He was white haired by the time that I was around. But yeah, that shot of Jack Woolgar as Sergeant Arnold on the cover of The Web of Fear is not unlike my Grandpop. Anyway, I think you've heard quite enough about my family. And this podcast, for a 24-minute episode of Doctor Who, has gone on for an hour and 10 minutes. I'm sure these podcasts were designed that I could just sort of rattle them off very quickly, and they're a monster of my own creation. Oh well.